Transformation of the global security scene and the future position of Europe. This session is organized in partnership with the ERSTE IWM Europe's Futures Fellowship Program. We welcome Ambassador James O'Brien, former head of the Office of Sanctions Coordination at the US Department of State. The interviewer will be Zsuzsanna Szelényi, former politician and program director at the CEU Democracy Institute.
Hello. Yes. So hello, everybody. It's nice to see you still around in this very long and dense and hopefully exciting program. So I have an honor to have a short talk with James O'Brien, who is a long member of the US Foreign Policy Administration, started many years ago, working with Madeleine Albright in her various functions, and UN ambassador and State Secretary of the US, and also you were working during the Clinton administration with hostage, is that right? Obama for hostages, and on sanction policies, and recently, until January this year, you were Assistant Secretary of State for European and Euro-Asian Affairs. So James knows the word pretty well from West and East, and we are talking about the word now. So the last 70 years, the international global order was the norm setting in our world, and it was working pretty well, providing stability or predictability, at least, for most of the countries in the world. But that has changed in the last 1 or 2 decades, and new emerging powers and adversaries or critics are questioning the normalcy of the international order, the Western liberal international order. This geopolitical disruption hastened the kind of dissolution or weakening of the West, the Western order, and now we are seemingly in a kind of international chaos. We are coming out from one international order which is going somewhere, but we are definitely not in a new order yet. Do you agree with this analysis, and where are we heading?
And we have 12 minutes, right?
Yes.
I started working at the State Department 10 days before the fall of the Berlin Wall. And at the time I said, nothing more interesting is going to happen, and I don't even know where the cafeteria is yet. In our system, you go in and out, and I don't know if it's cursed or lucky to be at this moment where we are at the end of this 70 or 80 year post-war framework, and we don't know what will come next. So I'd maybe just make 3 points. I think there are 2 trends that overwhelm every other one, and then a question about how we approach them. So one is the rise of China. Every single decision we have to make has to keep in mind that China is a technologically sophisticated power, interested in seeing global standards follow its lead, and with the capacity to overwhelm many of our economies. The question is whether, I'll say, the US and our traditional partners in Europe, North America, Asia, work together when we are roughly the same size and richer than China, or we try to manage separately, as I think Hungary is trying to do a bit. There's simply no way that 1.25 billion people against 9-10 million people is a fair fight. So we should do that together. Second question is, who is responsible for public goods? The assumption of the last 80 years was that if anything else, if all else failed, the US would step in to provide security on, say, the high seas, to secure trade routes, to pay a bit more than maybe our fair share for security of our partners in different parts of the world. And that's now in a point of controversy. So some of that is a normal argument. Is everybody paying as much as they should? As the states of Europe get richer, should they pay more for their own security? And in the US, there's a consensus among all kind of mainstream observers that, yeah, it's probably time to keep renegotiating the terms on which the US gets involved. But what's different in this administration is that there are sound or significant voices saying that the US should no longer provide for public goods like freedom of navigation. That's a very real change. It means that there's no longer a sort of court of last resort on the many issues that come up globally every day. And that leads me to my third point, the one I'll make here, which is how do we transition to deal with those challenges from the world that we had before? I'm trained as a lawyer. In US system and the Anglo legal world, we tend to work incrementally. You take what's there and you begin adapting it to a new context. That's a comfortable world for me. But I'm not sure that that's the world we're going to have. I think there may be some traumatic breaks where certain public goods won't be provided, like, for example, responses to dramatic weather events that cause mass migrations. And there won't be someone to provide the infrastructure and the help to deal with that kind of situation. And then we will have to see whether the states of the world can come together to engage and try to solve those problems. And we may have to do that from scratch rather than by adapting institutions that have served us, somewhat well for years.
It's very interesting what you're saying. So it's much more than foreign policy, right? It's all the global problems we are facing in these days. And of course, the new global order should find kind of a power or anchor to manage all of these problems, not just the basic resources. So can this new order be still liberal?
Yeah,
regarding that, the Trump administration is questioning a lot of basic liberal rules like free trade and alliance building, multilateral organizations.
That's a probably too big a question for me anyway right now. I think the question I'd like to see is will the new order be personal rule, or will there be rules that are applied? And then the question of whether it's liberal, I think, goes to, is it rooted in notions of individual choice and freedom and progress, right? The kind of people who criticize liberalism talk about a more communitarian approach. And in a way, that's a subsidiary discussion. What we're facing right now is the choice of certainly the country I know best, the president trying to say that all decisions must be made by him personally and that there ought not be constraints. So can it be based on a set of rules? And there, I think Europe has substantial leverage. I believe that Europe and the US, again, with other partners, Japan, Korea, Australia, Canada, need to work together because of the rise of China. But Europe can begin to say that there are certain conditions that make it possible for it to work with the United States. And I think having an erratic leader who constantly renegotiates the terms of engagement might be unacceptable. I think the lesson from what's happening on Ukraine and the defense spending in Europe is actually an example of how to do this well. To say that Europe will step up, will do more. It's willing to have the United States be involved, but we have to have some understanding that this will go on over time, that it's not simply a negotiation that starts afresh, every morning, like a sci-fi movie where the person wakes up not remembering what came before. And there, I think Europe has a fair bit of leverage.
Well, hopefully we will manage the 5% of the, military spending. We are really very far from them. And of course, well, Europe is not united, especially on China. We feel ourselves in the twin dilemma of having the relatively hostile approach from the US, or aggressive, let's call it like this, in these days. And of course, a lot of varying interest vis-a-vis China. I mean, some countries are very depending on, especially in economic terms, at market or resources. Some countries not so much. Some countries perceive it as a security threat. Others not so much. So especially on China, the disagreement within the EU is even more profound than on Russia. So
yeah.
How can Europe navigate in this, twin challenge?
It's a great question. I think two things. One is the Chinese may make this easy for you. I spent my time out of government working with companies around the world. We had 25 people who just worked with mostly American, but also European companies in China. And about a decade ago, the Chinese made clear that the American companies were no longer welcome in areas that they felt were significant for them. And so every possible land use problems, theft of intellectual property, loss of the stamps that allow, the chops that allow a business to work, everything just kind of went wrong. That process began later with European companies, but I think will go on. And that changes the calculation, particularly as China competes with high-end European companies on the most sophisticated technology. And that, I think, will help. But the second piece is maybe we need to focus on just a few areas. I believe that the prosperity of our societies over the next few decades will come from just a few industries: AI, life sciences, energy transition, and defense, which in the US drives a lot of innovation. If we focus in those areas, I think we will find that there's much more commonality between the US and Europe than if we're looking at areas that fall outside those spaces, especially in kind of basic commodities or raw materials.
So Europe's dilemmas are not unique. If we are in this in between towards a new global order, the biggest powers, the United States and China, seems by many countries to want to create new spheres of interest. It's not very easy. Probably the US doesn't want to give up its interest in Asia, and China doesn't want to give up its interest in Latin America and Africa, and of course everyone is fighting, or not fighting, but present in Europe in various ways. So there's a concept among smaller countries of connectivity or sovereignty. Many countries are more capable in certain way to express their sovereignty. They want to demonstrate more autonomy. So there are lots of countries who are trying to remain in between, to try to communicate with everyone. The Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán is one of the example who opened the policy of opening to the East 15 years ago. He announced connectivity paradigm a couple of years ago, demonstrating that the room for maneuvering, the freedom of maneuvering, should stay at national level. So is this good for something? Is it helping to create a new global order? Is it a useful strategy? What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think there's room for countries to experiment. We're not, let me make clear who we is. I think all of us collectively are not rushing toward the creation of totally separated blocks in the way that, say, Stalin wanted the sort of socialist world to be completely separated from the West. And that allows countries to draw slightly different paths as they look forward. But I do think as a small and medium company, you need to develop either a particular expertise that makes you invaluable, or be a part of a larger entity that you can influence. So for Hungary, obviously, the veto in EU councils is a critical way of amplifying its voice and its concerns. The Prime Minister has put a great deal of friendship or effort into the relationship with President Trump. You know, whether that buys him some extra influence with the US, I think is something that we will see, because the US president is not famous for respecting others other than the great powers. But that effort to be a part of a bigger thing is, I think, critical, but it has to be rooted in a clear sense of what special offer the small and medium country has to give to the larger bloc. But on the whole, I think having more channels of communication and understanding is a healthy thing in the world. One of the problems I felt in my work was that, say, Russia became ever more closed around a very small group of leaders. You know, others didn't know what was happening. It became very hard to have normal conversations. Just, you know, from 20 years ago when I could travel to Moscow and have regular conversations, by the time President Putin returned to the presidency, all of a sudden, the channels were just choking off and choking off. I don't know that that contributed to the specific, you know, decisions he's made over the last decade, but it certainly didn't make it easier to understand or to respond or anticipate that. And I think we don't want to repeat that with other great powers.
Yeah, of course, this can be sometimes very destructive strategies and tactics, and we definitely don't want that. Well, thank you very much, James O'Brien. It was wonderful to talk to you, and I pass you on my wonderful colleagues for the next panel. Thank you very much.